from the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
You ready, sir?
Sir,
Great.
the best I can be.
All right. Well, good morning. Today is December 15th, 2015. This is David Cline from the History Department at Virginia Tech, also working with the Southern Oral History program at UNC Chapel Hill. And we are here this morning as part of the Civil Rights History Project of the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, and the Southern Oral History program. And I have the great honor of being with General Julius Becton this morning. And if you could just introduce yourself, and this is the only time I'll script you at all, a full sentence to start with, I am, or that my name is. Yes.
I'm Julius Wesley Becton, Jr., Lieutenant General, United States Army, retired.
Thank
Happy.
you. Happy. Thank you, sir. So let's just, if we start with the where you were born and raised and a little bit about your family, and then we'll have a conversation and take it from there.
Okay. I was born in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. I went to high school at Lower Merion High School. I point that out because there are a few rather prominent graduates of Lower Merion. The Librarian of Congress, as an example, Jim Billington. Al Haig, of some notoriety. Hap Arnold, the former commander of the Air Force, then Army Air Corps. If you live here in Washington, the anchor on Channel 4 is a graduate of Lower Merion, and we have some prominent citizens. Kobe Bryant. Mm-hmm. Some people have never heard of him. Mm-hmm. I understand he's retiring this year. So
that's right.
We have that kind of program. We have some outstanding academics. At one time, Lower Merion was in the top 10 of the high schools in the country, and they're still very high now. Mm-hmm. And they have a great reputation. I'm happy to say that I got out of that place, did well.
And this is what they call the main line, right?
The main line of Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be, not supposed to be, it's a very ritzy and well-to-do. I was born there because my father was a janitor in an apartment. And we lived in the basement of the apartment, and it's a block and a half from Bryn Mawr College, and 2 blocks from Bryn Mawr train station that goes out from Philadelphia. It's a very other schools, Rosemount, Villanova, Haverford, Swarthmore, just some of the schools are in that area. So I grew up in an academic field.
Right. And what were the sort of restraints or boundaries of race and class in that area as you were growing up?
It was part of the segregation areas. However, the schools were not segregated. We could not go into certain restaurants, or we go to the theater. We were required to sit down in front rows, and if they were filled, we just, depending how much the film had been going, we could mingle with the rest of the folks. No one complained about it. But it was segregated. We're talking now back in the 20s and 30s. It took some time to get through all of those things.
And so you had your high school years there, and
high school years. Lower Merion is located in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. It's a township. There were very few things we could not do. We could not participate in the swimming program. I do not remember in the 4 years I was in high school, counting 9th grade, having gone to a prom. It wasn't encouraged, so we didn't bother doing it. As far as the schools were concerned, academically, we were encouraged to do the best we could. I happened to be a member of the student council. The president of my class, we started kindergarten together, and he'll be invited to my birthday party. We go back that far.
Wonderful. So after high school?
After high school, I joined the Army Air Corps Enlisted Reserves while a senior at Lower Merion. And after I graduated, I came on active duty.
And what year was this?
1944 when I came on active duty. My first duty station was Biloxi, Mississippi, Keesler Air Force Base. As I sometimes say with tongue in cheek, a great place for a young black 18 years old to go to in those times. In taking the physical examination for flight school, I flunked the eyes test. I had astigmatism. I knew I had that problem, but when I walked into my testing in every other place, they had a big chart on the wall, big E, and then scale down. In those days, I could take one look at that chart, and I had it memorized. Front, back, either way. They say, okay, cover your right eye, cover right, cover left eye, fine. I got down to Keesler Field, new machine, technology, in a darkened room with a machine right back here, and you walk in, I don't see any chart, room dark, they push the button, chart comes up. I had no chance, I flunked the test. And that sent me off to MacDill Field, which was an Army aviation facility, engineer.
What had you been hoping you might be able to do?
I wanted to become a pilot in what turned out to be a Tuskegee Airman. Didn't have that name when I was there. But I wanted to become a pilot because Hap Arnold had come out to our high school and convinced us, join the Army Air Corps and win your silver wing and gold bars. And by God, I went down, and after he finished his spiel, about half the football team went down to take the battery of tests. 6 of us passed. And on the 28th of December, 1943, we all were inducted into the Army Air Corps Enlisted Reserves. And that's how I got into the flight program in the first place. After going through New Cumberland, which was the reception station, I went to Keesler Field. My 5 other buddies went to Florida. Keesler, where they had black Americans, to Florida, they did not have. And so I might add that none of us became pilots for various reasons. After that, off to MacDill Field, Army Engineering.
Well, let me ask first, though. You said it tongue-in-cheek, Biloxi not the best place, perhaps, to be. Could you tell us a little bit about the conditions
a good example of the one weekend I took off leave from Keesler Field, a buddy of mine and I went down to Keesler, or to Biloxi rather, from the base. And while we're walking down the street, we heard some noise coming from the rear. There are 2 of them! And we turn around, here's a pickup truck coming down the pavement, driving at us. We flattened against the walls, and they went by. And we thought it may be a good idea to get back on post. And so we did. And that was typical treatment. And I point that out because many years later, I went back to Biloxi. I am now a Lieutenant General of the United States Army. I was invited back by the National Guard of Mississippi. I was greeted by the Adjutant General. I flew in my own aircraft, the Army's aircraft rather, which I control. I was greeted by this AG. We went from the airfield to a small camp that they had, and I forget the name of the base, or the camp rather. Spent the night there, and then we drove to the hotel where they had a meeting of National Guard and reservists, for which I was to speak to. And my first comment, how things have changed. And I explained what I was talking about. The last time I was down here, let me tell you what happened to me. And of course, all of them knew and understood exactly what I was talking about. I had state trooper escort from the airport to this camp, to the hotel, left in great fashion. But that was a significant change. Still not the best at the time, but it was better, hell of a lot better than when I was first there.
What were the barracks like in 44?
The wooden buildings, two-story, just like everyone else, but we were separated from the rest of the post.
Okay, yeah.
Controlled by the camp. My company commander was a white first lieutenant. He had a white exec, and the rest were black. First sergeant, the rest of the cadre. As a matter of fact, it was there after when I got down to MacDill on a aviation engineering unit, and with the same setup, basically structure. The first sergeant was told by the company exec that he's heard that there is a announcement for application for OCS. And that fellow Becton, I understand, was an aviation cadet. He might be interested. By that time, I had become the first sergeant's clerk. How did I become his clerk? One very wet day, the first sergeant came out and said, okay, I need a clerk, I need a volunteer, who can type? I had typing as a club, put my hand up and said, okay, come in, let's go in. Went into the first sergeant's office. I found out that the first sergeant had a little problem. My job was to read the company roster to him, the company roster, because he could not read. And he had it memorized basically. He would get up in front of the company and put that paper up and call the roll.
As if you were reading, right.
That's the kind of army we had at that time. And because I was able to type and help him, you're my clerk. Yes, first sergeant. And when his lieutenant came back from post and said, there's a roster, there's a campaign or a statement on a bulletin board at post, that there's going to be an OCS application board, Becton might be interested. First sergeant came in and said, you're going to go down and take a test. You're going to go down and appear at the board. Yes, first sergeant. I went down, and this is one of the weird things. The president of the board had been through the township of Lower Marion. And when I mentioned that I had gone to Lower Marion, played football there, I had at least one person on my side. And I didn't do poorly, but that made me feel pretty good when I was trying to answer the questions. That's how I started to get my process out of Keesler, out of Biloxi, out of MacDill Field.
MacDill, right.
And I passed the OCS test, passed the board, and in January of 45, I went off to Fort Benning, infantry OCS. Got there in December, as a matter of fact, of 44. School started in January of 45, and I graduated from OCS in August of 45. 15 August, as a matter of fact. And the interesting part, they had dropped a bomb. And we were destined to go off to become infantry lieutenants. And matter of fact, when Germany quit about April of 45, we started getting concerned because, hey, they might cut off OCS, and there was no, we were going to keep OCS going. As a result, when the Japanese dropped it, they said, well, we're this close, they wouldn't dare cut out OCS now. They didn't, and we graduated on the 16th of August of 45. I was sent off briefly to Alabama for basic training, duty, and within 3 weeks I was off to Pacific.
Well, yeah. Now OCS is sort of a quirk. OCS is not, we're not segregated, correct?
No, Officer Candidate School.
Right.
And they had the Officer Candidate School, and it's designed to fill the void when they drop off don't have sufficient officers coming out of West Point or ROTCs, and there's still a need for more officers. Officer Candidate School is the group that they turn to.
Right, and but that was an integrated.
That was integrated.
Yeah, yeah.
When I got there, integrated to a point.
You always have to make
Once we
that
got
clear.
inside the Officer Candidate Regiment, we were just like everyone else, every other soldier. Our training, we lived in integrated billets. We integrated everything. However, you step outside of that regimental area, you're back to the south. You waited in your line to get on a certain bus. Even there, going to the theater, outside the region area, you sat at a different location than your fellow candidates. But inside the training itself, completely integrated.
And were there service clubs on the base?
Yes, service clubs in the base, but we went to a black service club, and my white counterparts went to the white service club.
Interesting.
Same thing for the officers club, and it was the Southern way of doing business.
Okay, so then off to the Pacific.
Off to the Pacific, joined the 93rd Infantry Division, all black division except for the division commander and his key staff. One of the more interesting parts about that, we went overseas on well, first let me back up a little bit. Before leaving the States, I went to a staging area in California, and I'm groping now for the name of it, but it was the place to go from that staging area overseas. I met there were about 15 of us officers. 2 of them were West Pointers, and we became very good friends while we're en route to the Pacific. So much so that they convinced me doing our transit, if I ever had a chance to go to West Point, I wouldn't do it. I already had my commission, and I was not about to go through what they had to go through, the silencing treatment and the other things. They also taught me how to shoot crap. Took my money because they taught me how to shoot crap on a blanket. If you know anything about shooting crap, that's the last thing you want to do. And they took my money from that, and I reminded them of that later when I had a chance. Went off to the Pacific. The war was just over, but there still were. I went to a place called Morotai, which is south of the Philippines, north of New Guinea. There were 2 divisions on Morotai, the 93rd Division and the Dixie Division. Why the Army ever put those 2 divisions together, I'll never know. I've tried to find out since then. No one has given me a satisfactory answer. But during the fighting, they did very well against the bad guys, the Japanese. Keep in mind, this is a war now going on. We're fighting the Japanese. When there were no fighting going on with the Japanese, they fought each other. So much so that I was pulled out of my regiment. I was in C Company, 1st Battalion, 369th Infantry, and sent on detail to the Provost Marshal and the Dixie Division. Had a lieutenant come up, and we rode patrols together to try to make sure, maintain a little bit of peace.
Peace between the 2.
Keep in mind, I was a 19-year-old second lieutenant. This guy from Dixie Division was the same age I was, so we were 2 characters stuck out there.
Driving around in a Jeep.
To drive around to keep peace. Another interesting situation.
The Dixie Division flying Confederate flags and
Oh, yes.
things like this? Yeah.
Their Confederate flag as well as their regimental flag. One of my combat activities was required to take a patrol into the hills, and they knew the Japanese were someplace up in the hills, up in the mountain. The war was over, so we had a Japanese translator. We went out. I had my platoon. The Japanese translator had a bullhorn announcing the fact that the war is over, give up, come on, we'll take care of you. For that, we got shot at. and we were told not to engage. We had weapons to protect ourselves, but do not engage. We got shot at, we knew where they were, came back, reported that to battalion commander. He in turn reported to the regimental commander. The regimental commander said, hey, no, the division commander said, they're up there, we know where they are, we'll just starve them out. That took care of my first combat experience being shot at. And that went on for time to deactivate the division, January of 46. And if you had a certain number of quality points, promotion or overseas points, you came home. I did not have any of those things, I just got in there. So I and a few other folks were sent to the technical services. I went to Manila to a signal unit, and I reported in. Company, there were 6 officers, company commander is a captain. I was a junior lieutenant. The company commander was an infantry officer. The 3 of the officers were signal officers, and the rest of us were infantry. This is a heavy construction company, the kind of company that goes out and put overhead wire and cable, drill the holes in the ground, put in the poles, and then string cable. I never drilled, I'd never been in a signal unit before, but one very difficult. I knew what I had to do. I had a platoon of 30-odd soldiers. All of them were signal officers, signal soldiers, and they were happy to get a youngster in that could help them with many things. So they taught me how to climb poles, how to go up there and hang wire. We drilled a lot. I taught them how to do that. And I did something the other lieutenants would not do. I'd climb a pole and check it out. We had a chance on one occasion to put in poles for, we're talking now Manila, for radio or commercial, radio and televisions too. And we put in 100-foot poles. To put in a 100-foot pole, you got to put about 10 feet into the ground. Once you get the pole in the ground, now you have to go up and hang the wire. And I didn't have much choice to where I was going to go up or stay down. My soldier up hanging wire, I'm going to climb the pole too. I don't like heights. I got up that pole, went to the top of it, saw what they were doing, and came back down. Now, if you know anything about pole climbing?
Not at all.
Pole climbing, if you do tend to fall or slip, the last thing you want to do is grab. You don't. You push yourself away from the pole, and you have gaps on your feet, shoes, which forces your feet into the pole and keeps you from falling. My other lieutenant wouldn't go up, and my platoon was so happy within the company, said, my lieutenant does that, look at him. Well, I went up once. Have not been up that high again on a pole, but I proved that I could do it. And that's the way we operated. The company commander, as I said, was a infantry captain who I later ran across in other services. But my tour there ended when I reached the going home point, separated in 46, came home, I stayed in the reserves, although I could have been separated. And for some reason, I just felt that I liked what I was doing. I stayed in the reserves. And in order to do that, I had to become a signal officer because I was infantry transferred to Signal Corps doing this assignment. And when I went to reserve, I went as a signal officer. Stayed active in the reserves and went to reserve training. I had a chance to go to college. Mind you, I had no college at this time. And so I enrolled in Lincoln University in Oxford, Pennsylvania. Lincoln College, excuse me. And at the week that I was supposed to report for class, which would have been in February of 47, I got a call from my old football coach, Laura Marion. How would you like to go to Muhlenberg? Where in the hell's Muhlenberg? It's in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Why Muhlenberg? They got an excellent pre-med program. I wanted to become a doctor at that time. And I said, okay, sure. And so I went to Muhlenberg College, the first black American to go to Muhlenberg. I was on a football scholarship, and I used to collect about $30 a month stipend, which took care of my incidentals.
So rather than go to Lincoln, which is an
Yes.
HBCU, maybe the
Which
first
is black school.
HBCU, yeah,
But
to
I went to Muhlenberg.
Muhlenberg.
In Allentown, first black student. Did very well, as a matter of fact. However, let me back up a little bit. Muhlenberg, I went there in February of 47, and the coach at Muhlenberg had just gotten there. He came from a prep program, prep school, and he brought a couple of his own players, and they were really good players. He had spring practice, and we're out there under the lights, spring practice, contact, and I injured myself, my shoulders. Part of the reason I injured myself, or how it happened, my equipment was not properly fitted. The trainers who gave me the equipment had given me inappropriate equipment, and I suffered shoulder separation.
They purposely gave that to you.
I won't say on purpose, just that's why I ended up by getting it. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And I couldn't play football anymore. And I decided then that I really don't need this because I was doing quite well academically. And I found out that I could stay in college. I was there on a GI Bill of Rights, so I didn't need the money from that standpoint. I didn't need the $31 for incidentals. So I just dropped my football scholarship and got serious about playing academics. Of course, I forgot to mention, between the time I got home and going to Muhlenberg, I met a young nurse from suburban Philadelphia. She was in nursing training, and we decided to get married. So in 48, January of 48, 29th of January 48, we had our wedding. I'll point out that that morning, the day before that, I had taken a final exam in analytical geometry. I'm on a pre-med scholarship, pre-med student, and I did not do well. As a matter of fact, I took that test, I read the questions, reread them. In my answer on the sheet, rewrote the question and took a guess with each question and turned it in. And the professors called me in and said, Becton, you know you didn't do well. Yes, sir. I know exactly what you've done. You have been memorizing formulas, analytical geometry. And he's right. I've been memorizing, not understanding it. And up until that time, I'd been doing quite well. He said, okay, you've been making A's, but I'm going to give you a B for the course because you flunked the final exam. Yes, sir, I understand that. The very next day, I had my wedding. And a lot of friends say, I know you flunked the test. You're getting married. So that makes a long story short. We got married the 29th of January and started off on our honeymoon, and we just had a great time. I might add that on our honeymoon, which is a rather unique story, my brother, who younger than I, but had dropped out of school during World War II, joined the Navy, frustrated his parents and everyone else, but he'd run away from home a couple of times, so Mom was convinced that he would not do well staying there, so he wanted to join the Navy. She approved of him to join the Navy, and he going off to college, and he was going to college in Shaw University in North Carolina. to get down there, we were driving down, and so my mother drove the car, and my brother Joe, my wife Louise, and I went down. Unique story, your mother going on your honeymoon but that's the way we operate in those days. And dropped him off, came back up, and everything went fine from then. But that was in January of '48. Did quite well in school. Harry Truman, later that year, issued the Executive Order 9981 to integrate the military. I really had enjoyed being in the military, and I was in training camp at Aberdeen Proving Ground during the summer when the order was issued. And I came back home and told my wife, well, I'll have a chance to go back in the active duty, and I really liked what I was doing. And I'm not gonna be a doctor anyhow. I wasn't doing well in chemistry, which is not very good for a doctor. And so she was happy, satisfied with it, because she was a nurse working, so we weren't gonna starve. While I was at Aberdeen Proving Ground, when the order was issued, the commander of the post called all the officers together. He read the executive order signed by the president, and after he finished, and Aberdeen body was a completely integrated post, read the executive order, he called to the officers, and he said, as long as I'm here, there'll be no change. And by that he meant officer club number 1, officer club number 2, swimming pool number 1, swimming pool number 2, NCO club number 1, NCO club number 2. All the 1s are white, all the 2s are black. And during his period as the commander, after the order was issued, no change. So, when I went back on active duty, we were expecting our first child. I was on orders to a signal unit at Fort Bliss, Texas. I was recalled as an infantry officer because I wanted to go to infantry.
Pardon my interruption, but I just wanted to follow up. Having heard the president's executive order, and I imagine having some reaction to that and hope for
Sure. We're happy.
career
happy.
possibilities opening up, and then hearing the response of the commander,
Post-commander.
the post commander. Can
Yep.
you walk me through the range of feelings that you went through?
Well, let me back up a little bit of history. World War I, the black soldiers were fighting in segregated units. The commander in Europe, Pershing, did not want black troops, black commands. So 369th, my unit in World War II, had fought with the French because they wanted us, and did well. Came back well rewarded. And when the 369th got back in the States, they were not greeted as heroes, but they came back through New York and jeered. In 1925, I could be off by a year, there was a study done at Carlisle Barracks, the Army War College, basically saying that the black soldiers, while they may be good doing stevedore work, laboring, they were not good for thinking through a project or being able to officially control soldiers, and could not do certain other things, technical things. That study stayed around for a long time. So when World War II came along, that was the mentality of the officer corps, of the leadership, of the War Department. No reason to change it. When B.O. Davis became a fighter pilot, he had some major problems, but because the 99th Pursuit Squadron did very well. We were able to shoot down aircraft and not lost an aircraft, not lost a fighter that they were escorting. or bombing that they're escorting. So it doesn't surprise me or anyone else that there are certain beliefs in the military leaders that, well, just the president, that we can do, this is our army and we're going to do what we want to do. May I point out today, in 2015, you have attitudes where folks are saying one thing and the president's saying something else. It's not much different. So the army, soldiers and leaders are do what they're told to do, and once the word came out and they set the mind to do certain things, to get on with the program. Their job is to be loyal. And no one contested that I know of this post commander. I'm not even too sure that the Army War Department knew about it. I'm a lieutenant. I'm not going to get up there and challenge it, and no one else wanted to challenge it. So I left that post, by the way, when I'm ahead of myself now, but that's what the attitude was.
And the executive order didn't have a timeline. It just
No,
yeah,
it didn't.
Yeah, right.
It basically said, as I recall, I could look at that book I have over there and tell you I got the order in there, but it basically said, with all deliberate speed.
Right, very similar to the Brown decision, all
yes,
deliberate
that's
speed.
Exactly right.
Right.
And so I'm now back on active duty, went to Fort Bliss as a signal officer. I had applied for infantry, and I had applied to become a regular Army officer. The difference between being a regular Army officer and a reserve officer is, I hope it's understood. Mm-hmm. It's the way to go if you're going to be want to be a career soldier. Well, at Fort Bliss, I was in a senior unit company. I was a junior officer, and our job was to go from Fort Bliss to Fort Bragg and participate in the maneuvers. To do this, you got to drive by road, and we took our signal unit, trucks and all, from Fort Bliss to Fort Bragg. And as I said, I'm the junior officer, so I'm the guy in charge of the mess hall, kitchen. My job was to, with the cooks, to go out, cook, and when the soldiers join us, feed them, and then move to the next point while they coming along behind us. Mm-hmm. Cook, prepare a meal for them, select a bivouac area. Driving by road from El Paso to Fort Bragg is not easily done. Particularly, we don't have any radio communication. We're signaling unit, but we don't deal with radio, which is telephone. The very first place out, Van Horn, Texas. Very unique place. They didn't cotton to blacks at all, no matter whether in Army or not. It so happened that I'd going out, set up our bivouac area, set up the kitchen, done the cooking. When the company came in, then I had to take a listing of things, what they wanted from downtown. Okay, that's easy. I took a list of things they wanted. Of course, soldiers want things that they don't provide, like cigarettes and candy and you name it. I had a list. I went down to the local drugstore and I gave the list to the store owner, and he was happy. He sees a great big list of things he's going to sell. Mm-hmm. And I went to
And you're in uniform.
I was in uniform, actually,
Sure.
field uniform. I went to the soda fountain, where they make ice cream, soda, stuff like that. Well, I was enjoying myself. And my sergeant with me was collecting things that we were going to buy. All of a sudden, the guy behind the counter stiffened up. I didn't pay any attention to that. And the next thing, the guy tapped me on the shoulder. Get away from the counter. Why? I said so. I turned around. great big badge here, and a great big fellow in uniform with a weapon. And okay, I understood what he was saying, and I understood why he said it. And I said to the sergeant, "Have we paid for anything yet?" "No, sir." "Okay, we're leaving." And we walked out. And the sheriff had gotten back to the bivouac area. By the way, I forgot to mention my company commander was a Major White. He got back to the bivouac area, and the sheriff had gotten there before I got there. And he was telling this sheriff would tell him, this major, that this boy you got over here doesn't understand what goes on down here. And the major said, "That boy's a lieutenant. He's not from here. He's doing what I told him to do." And he said, "You better tell him something differently while he's here." Okay. Sheriff left. I get back. I'm told what took place. The very next morning, we're heading out, continuing our route, and a sedan, Studebaker as a matter of fact, had an accident. It passed us flying like a bat out of hell. And I had, by the way, a Jeep and a 3/4 ton, small pickup truck type thing. He passed us like a bat out of hell. She had an accident, clobbered. And we get up there to where it was, saw what happened, took the no emergency rounds. We took the 2 women out of the truck, out of the cars, put them in our pickup truck, and I continued in my Jeep on my way. My truck took these women back to the hospital in Van Horn, Texas. The doctors said that the action of these soldiers saved these women. And when the sheriff came into the hospital to hear about the accident, started checking, want to find, okay, how did it happen? Who brought them back? And my sergeant, who was with me the night before, that lieutenant who you chased out of town to want to save these women's lives. There's a message there too. Mm-hmm. We went on our way from there on to Fort Bragg, but that was a unique experience for me to go through that. It changed the minds of some people too, to include that sheriff. That, hey, maybe it's not all bad for these soldiers. That went on until we got to Fort Bragg, went through the drill of putting in communications. Mm-hmm. It was shortly thereafter, my orders came through, my assignment came through to go to an infantry unit. And I was then transferred from the 29th Signal to the 2nd Division at Fort Lewis, Washington, on competitive tour, competing for a regular Army appointment. Mm-hmm. And we did quite well at Fort Lewis, still a segregated unit. The division, 9th Infantry Regiment, had 3 battalions. 1 battalion was black, the other 2 battalions were white. I was assigned to L Company, 3rd Battalion, 9th Infantry. We trained and were prepared to keep doing what we're doing, and the Korean War broke out.
Mm-hmm. So I was just asking about the facilities,
yeah.
Right, at Fort Lewis.
Ready to go again?
Yes, we're going.
At Fort Lewis, 2nd Division, Infantry Division, had complete complement of 3 regiments, and the only regiment that had blacks were 9th Infantry. The other 2 regiments did not, and Division Artillery had a black battalion. The black battalion in the 9th Infantry, the 3rd Battalion, as I said, was all black except for the battalion commander was black too. Another story about that. And the artillery battalion, one of the sergeants turned out to be a pretty important person. He became a member of the Congress, Charlie Rangel. That name may ring a bell?
Yes, yes, it does.
He was from that battalion, and we talked about this many times since that time.
Mm-hmm.
But when, as I said, we trained very hard at Fort Lewis before the war broke out. I was, among my regular duties of infantry platoon leader, I was also in charge of the battalion, later became the regimental drill team. And we had a tremendously fine unit. Went out and put on performances, not only for soldiers, but also for the civilians. And did quite well, and I got quite a reputation for doing that.
Mm-hmm. And your equipment was up to date?
Equipment is up to date, everything. Like the rest of the unit, rest of the Army, but we're still black by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I asked for the battalion commander. He said, go ahead, do it. I said, we got some soldiers, white soldiers from the rest of the regiment want to join our team. Well, I was fine, happy with that. But I had to go to regimental exec. And I'll never forget what he said. So, Lieutenant, I like the way your team, what they do. They look good, and they're good for the Army, and certainly good for the soldiers. But if you put white soldiers in there, it'll break up the appearance and the color. Lieutenant Colonel saying that, I'm a lieutenant, not much I can say about it. Okay, fine. Again, we're talking 1950.
Mm-hmm.
We trained, and right at the time when in April of 1950, our battalion commander got orders to go to be reassigned. And it was, the war broke out, as you may recall, in June of 50. And he had just, still on the post, but not moved. And when the word came out that we're going to be sent overseas, alerted for war, for combat, we had a white battalion commander in now. And we thought that the Army would do the right thing, bring our battalion commander back, who we had before, who had trained us, did a very fine job doing that, and put us with our old commander. He was the only lieutenant colonel that I knew of that had a PhD. He happened to be a biologist, and he was also a very hard-nosed person for demanding excellence, and he'll fire you in a heartbeat and cause you major problem. But we were pleased with that because we knew that he was on our side. The person they brought back in to command was the commander that we had before he got there. He was still doing something else. And a lot of us thought that, hey, bring back our commander because he'd done so well. It didn't work that way. Now, we're deployed, 1950. The 9th Infantry were the first unit to leave the States to go to Korea.
Did you know where you were going?
We knew it was Korea, which is the war
Did
going
you know
on.
Did you know anything about Korea?
No, I didn't know where Korea was. Hey, I'm now 19, I guess I was 20 by that time. But I quickly found out where it was and what they were doing. I knew what it had to do when he got there. Be prepared to fight. And we were on board ships, heading off to the combat zone, landed at Busan, Korea. My unit was the L Company, was the first to land, went into a bivouac area while the rest of the battalion and regiment came on. Interesting enough, while we're sitting there, we got word that we're going to be removed from the regiment on a separate mission. This is 1950, and no one asked the question why, because it came from higher headquarters, MacArthur's headquarters. They want a battalion to go up to Pohang to protect an airfield. Okay, so as we were getting our gear ready, I got called to regimental headquarters. Lieutenant Becton, we want you to take a patrol with communication gear to set up a command post CP communication rather, so that when we closed in, when your battalion closed into it, they'll be ready to go. And so I got my sufficient number of men, small platoon, and took communication gear, a couple of three 2.5 ton truck with communication gear in the back of them. And we drove from our airfield to the site where we were sent to protect the airfield, And we got there. I asked the question, by the way, any activity in the area? Nope. No one, no bad guys there. And we got up to Pohang Dang, set up our gear, and as that morning, we're waiting for the battalion to join us, and we got reported in that the battalion got ambushed and lost some people, and they finally joined the area which we were in, the same area that we had driven through, and if the bad guy knew who we were, they could have done serious damage, but let us go through, thinking they could take care of bigger things later. When the battalion came up, the battalion got ambushed. And we survived that. My first close call. Mm-hmm. We stayed there, had a couple patrols, protecting the airfield. And then the orders came in for the battalion to move back and join the regiment. It is now September. We're breaking out of the efforts were now to break out of Pusan perimeter, which has some notoriety that the forces were driven back into that. And we rejoined the regiment and prepared to go to serious combat. We've had some combat up until that time. L Company was to be the lead company in the battalion after we attacked the area, after we joined the regiment. My platoon got selected to be the lead platoon in the company. And as we were moving out with all of our armor and everything else, ran into attacking a hill called 201. This hill was well protected. We got halfway up the hill and we ran into a tremendous enemy fire and had to protect ourselves and seek cover. And while we're there, the adjacent battalion, 2nd Battalion, engaged us because no one had told them that U.S. forces are going to be out there. One of those crazy things. Mm-hmm. So the bad guys are fighting at us. Our 2nd Battalion is firing at us. And we had nothing to do but hunker down until night came. And we returned the fire on the bad guys and prayed that we were able to do some damage on the bad guys, but we got hurt. Mm-hmm. When darkness came, we withdrew back into the battalion area. I had lost some people, but we brought them with us. But that breakthrough was sufficient enough for our battalion to move out. I might add that while we're in this also battle, we had support by our Air Force. And they mistook us for enemy. So they also attacked us too, fighter aircraft. And no matter what we did, they kept going. So my messenger, I'm a lieutenant now, he grabbed marking panels, got out in front and waved them up and down to the Air Force were coming back at us. They understood that wrong hill, get the next hill. The guy got back down. We got him an award, by the way, for that. And he probably saved our lives. The interesting part about that, I had told my men that once we get in combat, we're going to stick together as a team. Don't start running to the rear. If you do, I'll kill you. And, tongue in cheek, they thought. And when the plane came back, some of my soldiers started to get up and run, move back to the rear. And I took a carbine, a small rifle, and unloaded a magazine in front of them. And they looked at me and looked at the planes. And they knew that I was closer to them than the planes. They got back on the ground. In the meantime, the soldiers, the fighter pilots also recognized that we're good guys. And so they went elsewhere. My soldiers got back on the ground, and when we got back in the camp, recovered, we had a little discussion. Lieutenant, would you have shot us? You're here, aren't you? Well, yeah. Well, you didn't keep running, did you? No. Well, you make up your own mind.
Wow.
It was also during that period that I had gotten wounded. And that was my first trip to the hospital. I went back to Japan, as a matter of fact. Ended up in Sendai, Japan for my recovery. And I'm pointing that out because I came back to join the unit as soon as I could, because General MacArthur said we were going to be home for Christmas. And I wanted to be back after victory, wanted to be home for Christmas. It didn't work out that way. I rejoined the regiment from the hospital, and by that time the division had done quite well. We had moved north, into North Korea. And I was in the battalion, 3rd Battalion, 9th Infantry, and one of the lead regiments in the attack going up north. And once again, my company was selected to lead the battalion, and it was cold then. Remember, we left the States in the summertime. We didn't have winter gear, and we're now up north of the 38th parallel into North Korea, not too many miles from the northern border. Again, we had our battles to do.
And it's mountainous and it's cold.
It's right, and no winter gear. But we were able to take care of ourselves. We were now in November. It's cold, digging in to continue the fight going north. It was Thanksgiving time. And I remember that because they had turkey dinner. However, by the time the meal got where we were, the turkey was a little bit cold, like frozen. And we found a way to take care of that. Our kitchen did the best they could. And we had dug in, had our fires out, and trying to stay warm. And the Chinese entered the war. The dates you can check that, find what, because it's pretty specific when they came in. We continued the battle against the Chinese and the North Koreans. I was, again, my platoon picked to lead the company in attack. And we were told to reconnoiter a high ground in front of us.
Did you ever wonder why you kept getting chosen to lead?
Say that again, please.
Did you ever wonder why your unit kept getting chosen to
We
go
were
out in
pretty good
front?
at it.
Yeah.
And remember, I said I was on competitive tour. I was competing for regular army appointments. So the battalion commander, even new battalion commander said, okay, Becton can make it happen. Where the other guy could do the same thing, but no. And my company commander, who was a pretty good friend of my dad, he had other lieutenants he could pick on. But they had, two of them had been in combat in World War II. And I'm now a 20-year-old and eager and everything else. I had a good unit. We trained well. My soldiers trusted me and I trusted them. And I was prepared to do it.
You were ready, yeah.
This next time, we were making an attack up a hill. And as I was, before I left, my battalion commander had been approached by the adjacent battalion commander from the 25th Regiment, which happened to be a black unit too, from the 25th Division. And the battalion commander and my battalion commander were collaborating, talking about many things, I guess. I'm heading up the hill, running to contact. And I was told, do not engage because you're out there by yourself with your patrol. Return to the battalion. I came off the hill and report to the battalion commander and the other battalion commander, there's nothing up there. I know better than that. And my colonel looked at me and looked back at him, and I got orders, okay, get back up there. And I started back up the hill again with my unit. This time picked up a wound. One of those military, $1,000 wound. The bullet went through between my tendon and my left ankle and the bone. It did not touch the tendon, nor did it touch the bone. Now, how much space is down there? Not much.
Yeah.
The bullet went through there. Nothing, no damage done to either. I came back down. That battalion commander is still there. Are you satisfied now, Colonel? And he, so I got evacuated from the battalion. That's when history will tell you that the Army had its first defeat, when the Chinese and the North Koreans attacked U.S. forces and chased them out of North Korea. I got evacuated by air. The battalion and regiment suffered severe damage. The final toll were, I think, as I recall, of the battalion, 5 officers survived. The others were captured or killed. I fall in the category 1 of the 5 survived because I've been evacuated and now back in Japan. The U.S. forces were pushed back south of the 38th parallel and regroup. I am now back in Japan, back to the same hospital I've been in before, which I rushed out of. Went to the same ward, as a matter of fact, and there's, you back here again? Yes, I'm back here again. And this time I'm not going to rush home.
Right.
And they understood. I got very good treatment and care. And during that period, the Army regrouped, recovered, prepared to take care of business. I was told to rebuild your strength by going out and learning how to ski. Sendai is known for its slopes and stuff like that, and so fine, I'd go out and try it. I never skied before, you understand. Went out to the training area where they teach skiing, and they gave me skis, flat board, 2 straps, one across the instep, one across the heel. No boots, nothing else. And I did like you might expect. You ski, by the way?
Yes.
So you understand what kind of trouble I had. I did not do very well at all. But I managed to get back off the hill and went back to the hospital area. But that taught me a lesson about trying to ski with that kind of equipment. I eventually come back to the unit. Now is March. Back to the regiment. And back in the base camp before I moved up to the regiment, they had a new executive officer in the regiment. Lieutenant Colonel Orlando Barsani. And you'll see why I remember that name in a few minutes. And when I get back to the regimental rear, and I meet the battalion exec, and he introduced me to this regimental exec. And the battalion exec said, we're going to put Becton into back to battalion, he'll put him into the S3 operation. He's been in combat, he understands, he can help us there. Barsine took one look at me, Lieutenant, how you feel? I feel pretty good, sir. Oh, we're going to put him in the company. Why? Because the company he picked for me was L Company. Sound familiar? The company I was in before. They had lost all their officers and a few of their NCOs. They needed some leadership up there. Battalion adjutant said, but sir, he's going to go to the company. Yes, sir. So I end up going back to L Company, excuse me, and he's correct. We had all the officers been gone, lost. Some of the NCOs, I had a couple of key NCOs that knew me and I knew them. So I'm now the company commander, and we organized what we had, got in some new lieutenants, second lieutenants, and I'm the first lieutenant.
Still all black or white replacements at this point?
By that time, we were integrated.
Okay.
I failed to mention one point.
Yeah.
Let me go back a little bit. Back in August, before I got 201, when I got my first wound, the regimental commander, Colonel C.C. Sloan, had been told by the adjutant we got incoming replacements qualified by MOS, military specialties, but not by race. And Sloan said, put them where they're needed. Put them where they're needed. That took care of the integration within the 9th Infantry. We went to the battalions, spread them out, and when I got my first integrated soldier, he was a Mexican-American from Texas. And when he came in, I told my platoon sergeant, don't let anything happen to that guy. He's our first one non-black. We're not going to hurt him at all. And he said, yes, sir, we'll take care of that. And with that, we became integrated. And so now the division's integrated. And by the time we're in the fighting, we had black company commanders and white battalions and so forth. So we're doing quite well. When I got back to the
So it was military necessity that really changed.
Say again?
It was military necessity. It was the need
Yeah,
for
there's no question about
bodies.
it.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with the executive order.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we were combat, where people were qualified, and the commanders recognized their soldiers, put them where they're needed. Military necessity. And that's the way we operated. By the time I got back to the regiment, it would have been about, I guess, April. I could check my book to find out what time it was. And we were in a base area. The division was still engaged. I am now a company commander, lieutenant, first lieutenant, and we got a white officer, captain, assigned to us to be the company commander. And he had not been in combat before. The company was completely integrated by this time. And we had a long discussion, the captain and myself, and he said, okay, I want you to keep doing what you've been doing, to be in charge. I'll take care of the base area and support you. And that's how I finished the war in Korea. With that arrangement. I should point out that by that time I had received 2 Purple Hearts, received a Silver Star for the operations back in the breaking out of the Pusan perimeter, attacking Hill 201 when I got my first wound. And it's now into May. Things are going, we're moving gradually ahead, but by that time they started rotating people home. and I was able to rotate home, leaving the regiment, came back to the States, went off to, I was assigned to Camp Edwards in Massachusetts. The Army's completely integrated now, up to a point. Up at Camp Edwards, there's one black company, and their job was post police and kitchen work, cooking for the soldiers, small base. And our job was to police the post, police picking up trash, and cooking soldiers for the white soldiers and the other white unit. Oh, that unit was all black, I might add. And I did not cotton to that very much because I've been in combat. I've done a pretty good job, I thought. Now I'm back in this kind of situation. And so I started complaining. I called my branch by telephone and say, look, I know what you got me out here. I'm still on competitive tour. I understand that too. And but don't you think I deserve something better than this? Within an hour, so I got a call back. You're being transferred to Indian Gap Military Reservation, which is a basic training for soldiers. And I went from Camp Edwards to Indian Gap as a company commander, basic training. It was there that I've been promoted to captain. It was there that I got integrated into the regular Army. Orders come in, and I'm in tall cotton, happy about that. Training my unit, we're doing a great job turning out basic trainees. Also, after in addition to training soldiers, I was also selected to go to signal officer communication course, infantry, learn how to become a commo, communication officer in an infantry unit. Why was I selected for that? Because I'd been a signal officer, and they said, okay, he can do that. Big difference between pole climbing and stringing wire and being a guy in charge of communication on the ground. But I went off to school. I come back to Indian Gap after the period of school training, which would about maybe 9 weeks, and was then, my family stayed, by the way, when I was in Indian Gap, they stayed in Philadelphia. And I would going back and forth. Got orders to Germany. So this, okay, we can do that. Packed up the bags. We now have 2 daughters. I'm not sure, did I mention the fact that when my first daughter was born, I was going back on active duty? If I didn't mention that, I was heading to Fort Bliss, and my wife was expecting momentarily. They put my orders in delay, permitted me to stay in the Philadelphia area while she delivered. By that time, they sent me to Fort Monmouth, which is not too far away. I was sent to a signal unit there while we waited. Our first daughter was born, Shirley. And then I went to Fort Bliss. And the family never came down there because it was just wasn't right for the family to move and stuff like that. The second daughter was born when we're heading off to Korea. She was born in July, and we took off from the Fort Lewis in July. She was born in September. And still talking about race relations. When I left the post at Fort Lewis, we had to stay, my family had to stay at a guest house. And I made arrangements for them to stay there, and by the time I was heading overseas, and my wife had a problem with the manager at the guest house. One of the things which you sort of deal with, while the Army military portion was integrated, some of the whole facilities weren't. We still had the mentality of our civilians. And my mother had flown in from Philadelphia to drive my family back to Philadelphia. My mother was a very interesting person. She'd go any place, fly, drive, whatever. And so she drove the car with my wife, our first child, my company commander, and his wife, who was also pregnant, which made it speak to why my company commander kept picking me. He could trust me, and our dog. And they drove back from Fort Lewis to Philadelphia. Had no problems en route. They got tremendous treatment. Went to Columbus, Ohio, where my company commander's wife was going, and their child. Then they continued on to Philadelphia. My mother got her first speeding ticket on Pennsylvania Turnpike, and they explained it to who they were, et cetera. The trooper was very polite and said, "Okay, go on, but take it easy." But my mother she liked to drive, heavy foot, and I got to the point that I had to, since I was one in charge now, and she was living in our house, "Mom, the next speeding ticket you get, that's going to be it. Because I control the insurance and we can't go through it. You kill yourself." But okay. Now I'm heading off to, I just had to put that in because she was part of the program. I go off to Germany.
I was probably more scared during that conversation than during some of your combat tours.
Yes. We got off to Germany and joined the 2nd Armored Division in West Germany. Mainz-Gonsenheim is our location, where my unit was located. And I was in Combat Command B, CCB. I'm now a captain, communication trained, and I became the communication officer for the battalion, 42nd Armored Infantry Battalion. And I did a pretty good job. Learned how to do things with the communication. I became a Mars military amateur radio. And I set up the Mars station for the regiment. And we named the station after CCB, the regiment. And the commander could not be happier because his regiment had a Mars station. No one else had one. And so I became a tall cotton. I think that not many other people could have gotten. And continued training at this now in Mainz, Germany. I now been over there long enough to come home and doing this training. After having my communications training, I became a company commander, which made it my 3rd company. Company in combat, even though it was terminated short time, but still did the work. Company at Anytown Gap, training company, and I got another infantry company, armored infantry, and we trained pretty hard. Had personnel carriers as our movement, armored plates, and so forth. I returned to the States. It is now 57. I'd gone to, by the way, back to Fort Benning for advanced course training before going to Germany. And I failed to mention Then we had our third child there at Fort Benning.
Now, are you seeing racial change in the Army
The Army
post-war?
yes,
Yeah.
it's going through many changes, and by this time, at Benning, that time I was completely integrated in an integrated unit, and by the time I got to Germany, totally integrated, but yet absent of certain people. So the signal officer, this senior black officer in the division, was a black lieutenant colonel assigned to our technical service trains, as we call them. And when it got time for a battalion commander to change, we were encouraging him to become the new battalion commander. I knew enough people at the division because I had, as a signal officer, as a communicator, I used to deal with folks at the division. And when it's in operations, I dealt with the people there. And I tried to encourage this lieutenant colonel to come down and join us because we had a fine battalion, and he was qualified. And the interesting part about it, his name was Johnson, but his wife was, you may have heard of baseball player Campanella. His wife was from that family. And with that name, he could have gotten anything he wanted to, but he decided no, he would just stay where he is because he's comfortably at Red Hill, but exec officer of a unit, not a combat unit. And so now he stayed up there, so we did our thing. It's now time for me to come back to the States. I was assigned ROTC duty. Mind you, I did not have a degree. And I was assigned to a place called Prairie View. I went there as a captain, assigned to the military science department, the only captain in the unit, a lieutenant colonel, 3 majors, and me, captain, the junior officer. A couple of challenges. When I went to that job, I was sent there by a very good friend who's now at the Department of Army. He said, you go down to Prairie View and go to school, take classes, get your degree. Roger that. So when we get to Prairie View, and oh, by the way, from a racial standpoint, while driving down there, we were told by some friends from Germany, now when you go down, you stop by white friends, when you go through Mississippi, stop by this place. My parents are there, see them, and they'll take care of you, drive you through. Now, make sure you don't talk to 2 people. One is the mother, they talk to my father, just don't talk to my mother. And he'll understand. Don't talk to her, she won't understand because I'm still black. And they still haven't gotten to that point. We drove, and I might add also, going there that while we're in Germany, I keep forgetting these things now. While in Germany, my mother and mother-in-law joined us. They came over to visit with us to see Europe, trip over there. And we convinced my wife's mother to stay with us. My father finally got tired. He said, when are you coming home, Rose Becton? And she got the message, so she got on the boat and came back. And she had a good time. Mom had a good time, stayed with us. And that made the family comfortable because my mother-in-law with us, she took care of things. And she stayed with us until she died. And I might also add that while she was with us, whenever there was a disagreement in my family, my wife and myself, Mom was on my side, which irritated Louise no end. But that's another story. By that time we get to Texas, Prairie View, with 3 daughters. The third one was born while at Fort Benning, and she's from her background. Birth certificate reads Georgia. And it was also in Columbus, Georgia that my wife learned how to drive and get driver's license. And the policeman who checked her out for driving, he got into the car, and Louise got on the driver's side, and he said, okay, told her to do certain things. And she drove probably less than a block, turned around because the police officer told her, parked the car, and got out. You pass. And I later found out that the officer was so impressed by the way that she controlled herself, the way she got into the car, the way she adjusted everything, and how she made the U-turn and parked the car. That's enough for him. That was her driver's license. Okay, we're now at Fort down at Prairie View. We got a house rented from an old math professor who had a little second house. My professor of military science, my boss, was lieutenant colonel. I said we got 3 majors and myself. And I had my group was the teaching the juniors. Military science 3 is the specification. There are no white students, a few white faculty, and I was the only combat experienced officer in this group of the late war. We had some World War II. And when I announced to Professor of Military Science that I'm going to take courses, and he blew up. There's no way in the world you can take a course and work for me. Sir, I was sent down here. You're assigned here, right? Yes, sir. You can't take courses. The work is too demanding. And I should also point out, in addition to being an instructor, I was also his adjutant, which meant that my desk was right outside the office where his was located. The next day, after we had this little blow up, I report in about 7:30. The colonel comes in about 30 minutes later, closes the door, which is usual. And a few minutes later, I get a call. Becton, get in here. Yes, sir. I go in his office, report it. All right, you can take the courses. But let me tell you one thing. If there's any indication whatsoever is interfering with your being an instructor, you're in trouble. Yes, sir, I understand that. No question about it. No, sir. I came back outside, and my couple of sergeants, they knew what was going on. They smiled, and 2 of the 3 majors were roaming back and forth. They got word that I could take courses now. And the 3rd major was the exec, and he had his own office. And I'm pointing all these things out to present the climate, because I am now a regular Army captain, the only regular Army officer in the group, the only non-college graduate, the only one who'd been in combat recently, and now I got my way by going to taking courses. So I'm sort of target for a lot of people to shoot at. But I was pretty good at what I did. I was a good instructor, and I did well academically. And I should point out that I developed a relationship with the students that even to this day, we're still very close to each other. I am now approaching graduation. Been there for 2 years. The last year I'm there, the Army pays for my going to school. They had a final semester plan. When you get within your final semester of graduation, the Army foot the bill for books and everything. Mm-hmm. So that took care of no worries from that standpoint. I was able to do my job, being an instructor, able to do my classes quite well. I was able to influence the professor of military science, a new one came in by that time. And he understood what I was doing. He was a very fine, he was then a colonel that came in to become the professor of military science. And he was able to influence the person coming in to be the commencement speaker, who I had met back when I was in Washington. And we're now 1960, time for commencement, received my degree. The commencement speaker makes some reference to Captain Becton, such a good man, great reputation. This did not hurt anyone's reputation. The school, my fellow students smiled and the professors smiled and stuff like that. And when I crossed the stage to get my diploma degree, the person reading off the graduate, list of graduates, stopped the movement. Wait a minute. Captain Becton is the 5,000th graduate of Prairie View A&M University. Now the chance of my being a 5,000 graduate is like a snowball in hell. I don't believe it, but the 5,000th graduate took place during that period, and it's convenient for the Army and for the university to use that opportunity. I walked off the 5,000th graduate that's smiling and got my degree. We're in tall cotton. Okay. I now have a diploma, went back into the Army, and went off to the Command General Staff College, a school for particularly selected young captains and majors and lieutenant colonel, but particularly young captains. I'm now a regular Army officer in the school at Command General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. And peers, support, could not ask for more because I met people in Germany, at Indiantown Gap, and elsewhere. My student company commander at the Fort Benning, who was a lieutenant colonel, he maintained a relationship with me. He later became a division commander, which is rather important. I'm now at Fort Leavenworth, tough academic work, working very hard to get through. While there, I become a major. The Army is still not that overrun by black officers, but in my class at Leavenworth, we had 16 black officers out of 600. And we sort of kept together as a group, except for one. He was lieutenant colonel. And he felt that it was above him dignity to associate with us majors, junior to him. So, to make a long story short, we got through. He failed academically. The rest of us made it because we studied for exams, and he refused to join us for studying.
Right.
And we got through.
You worked together, right?
We worked together. From Leavenworth, it is now in the 62, I graduated in 61. Kennedy had become the president, had to little fracas down in Mexico, Cuban, whatever you want to call it. And they start their little messing around in Germany. And before we left Leavenworth, we had orders to France. Of that group that went to France, 6 of us went to the communication zone in France out of class, which is for combat arm officer is not all that good, we thought. And we start, why us? Why aren't we going to Germany to become, where the real army is, not technicians, logisticians, stuff like that. I finally got the message, someone else got it, that the commander in the communication zone, France, had complained about not getting his fair share of talent. And of the 6 of us going into France, 2 of us were black. One was this lieutenant colonel who failed at Leavenworth, and I ended up in the same unit that he was, which is a very interesting story. Another story. He finally decided to talk. And I got a pretty good job. We went to logistics G4, and I was in operations G3, became eventually a chief of plants and operations in France. My job was to prepare for the evacuation of U.S. forces, families from Germany as they're passing through with me, at the Russians across the border or East Germans across the border. We get them out back to the States. And I got pretty good at doing that too, I might add. In the meantime, this lieutenant colonel who had failed Leavenworth, he sort of got in more troubles in his job, but I just ignored him. His wife was livid because we were doing so well, the family doing so well and we had I should point out, at Prairie View, our 4th daughter was born. And I might add, I keep forgetting to say, my wife, during that period, she worked to get her degree and became a staff nurse in the College of Nursing and was doing such a great job so that when the dean left, my wife was asked to be the acting dean for the period while the dean was back getting her doctoral study complete. So you got this young RN, BS, who had did so well that the president of college said, okay, you be the acting dean. Wow. That did not make the other nurses very comfortable who've been there for some time, but
Sure.
they respected her. And I'm making a point of this because that's when my 4th daughter was born. My wife took time to do that. And she had developed a relationship with the doctor so that he suggested she go to Hempstead, which is a nearby town, rather than having the birth at the university. So she delivered there. The very first male to see her was the professor of military science, the new colonel who came in. And he, as I said, he's a great guy. He was there when my wife was born. I was on campus working and also in class. He later became her godfather. I might add that this daughter went on to become a Colonel Air Force, and she's now Colonel Air Force retired. So time that goes on. Okay.
Let me ask you one question or a couple of questions.
Sure.
During this period, were you keeping track of I mean, you're in a military world in some ways, but there's the wider world as well, and there's a lot of change going on. So
There are.
and especially in terms of race issues and with the Montgomery bus boycott
All
in
those
55
things came up, and we were keenly aware of it. And many of I and my peers, we decide we're demonstrating how good we can be doing our job in the Army. We don't have to get out there and parade with placard or join any sit-in and stuff like that because we think we're doing a better job helping race relations by proving that we can make it. And that was our relationship with the public and with peers who are no longer in the military, and they understood. When I later became a president of college, president of Prairie View A&M University, and that's question came up, what were you doing during the war? I was fighting, protecting you, that's what I was doing. And they understood that too, and it helped. We had friends who, not military, who were involved. Fraternities got involved. My wife was sorority, an academic sorority, I might add. Her group did things for the veterans and for other people, but did they get involved in those kind of things? No. Where it came home to haunt us, I might add, was when my daughter, Karen, who was the second daughter born, and she went off to South Dakota. Don't ask me how she got to South Dakota, but I still don't know. But she had heard that good schools, and a couple of her friends suggested she go there, so she went there. And this took place when I was in Korea, and when I heard that she was gotten very good student, and her participation was writing letters for the local newspapers, campus newspapers, anti-war articles. And when I heard that, of course, you knew I blew up, reminding her where she's from, what she did. I never want to see an article written by you about anti-military. And she stopped writing. Naturally, she stopped writing because we were paying the bill for her to go to school. That was one thing. There were marches. We did not participate. We understood what they're doing, and we maintained by doing our job in the military to the best of our ability, help the overall opportunity of what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. I still believe that today.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was there some pride in the fact that the military had pioneered in integration?
Yes.
You know, even though it was bumpy, of course,
yes.
but they
it was
did.
Realized by a lot of people, certainly us in the military, but to the public too, that the integration of the military and what black majors, black students, academicians were doing on the college campus and in the military itself were making things happen, good things happen, because we had the Tuskegee Airmen, mm-hmm. proving that they could do that, what they're doing. We had senior officers were able to get things done, and it wasn't too long thereafter because I became a major general, a brigadier general, colonel first and brigadier general, and I had command, and my first command was at Fort Hood as a brigade commander, colonel, in the same unit that I was a communication officer for back in Germany. Excuse me. The same relationship I made in Germany, I would still continue. And again, out of the military back at Leavenworth, and when I left Leavenworth in France, because in the military we float around, we meet each other, right. And things, we get to know each other. Mm-hmm. It's a great relationship. And as I said, in France, I was able to help to develop a relationship. I did my job very well. The lieutenant colonel, then colonel of the unit I was in France became a colonel and later a brigadier general. And we still maintain a relationship even though I was, by that time, a major lieutenant colonel. He's just a good guy. He was able to help me to get some things done later. He spoke up for me on certain occasions, and it helped. And my peers, black peers, were able to get the same thing. We worked hard. Mm-hmm. We knew what we had to do. We had our jobs prepared for, and we advanced in the ranks, and were respected for what we did. We got to certain schools because of what we'd done, not because we were black, but because we were good at what we did. And to this day, I have a relationship with people. That call I just had, I'm going to return, is from a colonel who was retired from the Army, is now a civilian in the Department of Army. They call them SESers these days. A senior person working in personnel. He's going to tell me something what's taking place in the Army today. He understands what I've been doing, what I have done. And going ahead a little bit, I have been asked to do certain things by the Congress. Several years ago, the Congress set up a commission for diversity in the military leadership diversity. The chairman of that commission was a general, 4-star, Les Lyles. I was the vice chairman, lieutenant general, and we prepared to study for the Army, for the military, to deal with diversity. Now, is that race relations? Not really. It's diversity, because there's a big difference. And some of our people, military and civilians, were unable to understand that difference. Affirmative action had certain gateposts. So many, it had a formula. How many folk can you have, or what should they be doing? Diversity is not so much how many blacks you have, but is what are you doing for the total population to demonstrate that we're all qualified. And diversity is a function of learning from each other. And a lot of folk never got that message, even to this day. And so I've had a chance to work at those levels.
What do you think of these? I mean, we've seen some tremendous changes recently with combat positions for women being totally open.
I'm smiling because it was our commission, Military Leadership Diversity Commission, that came down very hard. Get rid of the restriction for women. If they're qualified, put them in a job. And we sold it. It went so far as to what just happened with the Secretary of Defense. But when women went to Ranger School, I could not have been happier. Some folks, even in this building, were livid about it, because we got some very senior officers here who think they know what's going on. And they blew up, and I blew up too. And in this very room, we had a meeting one day. Rotary had a meeting, and I'm not a Rotarian, but I announced the fact that of the bringing in military, not only in the military, in the Army, but putting them where they're qualified. And women had just been integrated into the Ranger School. And I could not have been happier. And I was sitting in the next room for dinner with a Rotarian. I got a telephone call from my son, who I forgot to mention when he was born, but he was a captain in the old guard in Washington as a company commander, honor guard company commander, and he resigned his commission because he was never convinced that what he got was on his own. His name is Julius Wesley Becton III. And every time he went any place, Becton, I know your father. How is he doing? And you can take that for so much long. And he finally got fed up with it.
He wanted to make his own.
He wanted to make his own.
Yeah.
Let me break for one story. He as a company commander, captain at the Pentagon. No, at the Pentagon, preparing the ground for a parade for the honor guard, old guard, that was for the military. He was out there preparing the grounds, putting in flags, markers, and two senior officers come out. One, a fellow named Gordon Sullivan, Chief of Staff of the Army, and a fellow named Colin Powell, Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. And they see Wes. He comes up to him. Wes, how you doing? Fine, sir. How's your father? Fine, sir. What's your mother doing? Sir, they kept on with this crap. He finally said, sir, I got to go to work. Okay. Because all this time, his colonel's over glaring at him, but he's stuck with these 4 stars. That's the kind of relationship that we've had over the years, and we still got that relationship to this day. But, okay. Where am I now?
Oh, we had been talking about the change in the Diversity Commission and Ranger School and women women in the Rangers.
Yeah, well, but that has worked very well. I think the proof of it, those 2 women got through Ranger School. And the interesting part about that, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 lieutenant generals in this place. One is senior to me, older than I am by a couple of years. He was sitting at this dinner table when I'm sitting there, and my son calls me and said, he's a Ranger too, my son. Hey, they just got through. And I walked back in just smiling and said, I just got the best news you can think of. My son called me and said, those 2 Rangers, female, just got through. And there are maybe 15 of us, 20, except for this colonel. Ha! Enough much, a bunch of lesbian. And I blew up. I'm on one end of the table, he's the other end. How in the hell can you say that? They're qualified, they proved it. And these civilians saying, they're these non-army type. They're listening to this. And right now we're at the point we may speak to each other. But I made a point to prove, I got a piece of paper that said not only were they qualified, they're proven that they met the standards, they're doing a job.
Oh, absolutely.
And he'll grunt. And my wife accused me of being inappropriate. I just refused to talk to him except to say hello until he apologized something else. But anyhow, they're qualified. And that's what we expect. That's what we want them to do. And so to answer your question, yes, I've faced that. Here we have it. There are 580 people here. 1, 2, 3 Black American families. 3 wives, spouses who are here, their spouses, male or deceased. The other family, Leo Brooks. The name may not mean anything to you, but his son just got promoted to 4 stars a year and a half ago. And he is doing this superbly well. Leo, the father, is a retired brigadier. His other son is a retired 2-star, 1-star. And so they got 2 sons, 1 brigadier and 1 4 stars. And they all talk about their 2 sons and what they're doing. And other people talk about that too. And I get irritated. I say, wait a minute, hold it. They got a daughter and she's my lawyer. She's better qualified than they are. Okay, so we have an understanding. If you're gonna talk about the Brooks, you better talk about Marquita. She is our lawyer and she's doing a fine thing.
Terrific.
And so she's a big law firm downtown, and so, but we have that kind of relationship here. Interesting enough, I've been here since '08, as I said. Leo came in 2 years later, and amusingly so, he got here because Louise had a luncheon for some general officer wives here, Black, and that luncheon rotated around. And Naomi, who was Leo's wife, was in the group. The person in charge of apartments and renting and getting folks in was invited to this luncheon to talk about opportunities to come into the Fairfax. And she did a great job. Naomi goes home that night and said, Leo, we're moving. We're what? Leo, we're moving. I just saw the place. We're not moving. We can't afford to move. We're not moving. Did you hear what I said, Leo? We are moving. And so we've known the Brooks for a long time. Ever since Leo come, every time he thinks about it, I hate you. Talking to my wife. She smiles.
That's funny.
You may see a guy just going by in a wheelchair, neck in a brace. And that is a Air Force brigadier, injured, severely injured, and is, well, that's the kind of folks we have here. But anyhow, the Brooks we're good friends. And their son is just doing a superb job. He's the commander of the Pacific. You can't get much bigger than that.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy about it because I've known him since he was a teenager, as I've done their daughter, who was also a teenager. We first met him at Fort Hood. And he just, every time something happens good, I feel great.
So there's a real fraternity among.
Oh, there's no question about it. As a matter of fact, when Vince got his promotion to 4 stars, I had a 4-star brace pen given to me by a former boss who gave it to me after I got promoted to 3 stars. And he said, I missed all your promotion. I'm going to be there ahead of time. Pen this on when you get promoted. Well, that's not going to happen. But I kept it. When Vince got promoted to 4 stars, he pinned on my 4 stars I gave him. That kind of relationship we have. We have fun.
It's terrific.
And I'm trying to figure where I left off at. In Germany, I think.
Oh, we had gotten up to about 61.
Okay,
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
good. I went to France, came back from France in '63. I was in France, we were in France, Verdun, France, when Kennedy got shot. And we listened to the old radio, and something which the American people don't realize, that when that happened to our president, every radio station in France started playing music that was appropriate for our death back here, for our leader. And you could not ask for, be more proud of what, for us, or what they did for us. Okay, I get back from France, go off to the Armed Forces Staff College down in Norfolk, Virginia. Armed Forces, all schools, all services. As was Leavenworth, but only primarily Army, but other services were there. Armed Forces Staff Colleges teach about each other's services and to become joint staff officers.
Okay.
Okay. There, the daughter that was born at Fort Benning, living on the post at Armed Forces Staff College, the military used the school and local community. And we were only black at the Armed Forces Staff College. So when our daughter in the 3rd grade riding the bus from the school, that school was just integrated. So she became the first black to go to that school as a student. She was met at the door when the bus pulled up by the principal. He got her off the bus, escorted her into the class, and the teacher was told about who's coming in. And he made sure she got back on the bus, no problems. And that's the way her class went. She was a great student. She did very, very well. She moved from, in the first semester, from being in a 3rd grade, she moved to advanced to 4th grade because of what she'd been doing before that. And she continued to have this escort by the principal. It got to the point when we got out of that environment back into Washington, she felt so pretty good about herself. She had a principal taking care of her.
Right.
I'm now in Washington, assigned to DESPER, the Office for Personnel. The same office this colonel I'm going to be talking to later. My first job was dealing with National Guard and Reserve Affairs for the Army. And it was during that period that the Alabama battle took place. Going to the bridge and the riot.
In Selma, yeah.
Rosa Park. The Army Operations Center was made up of not assigned persons. Most of it came from volunteer people elsewhere, pulled together and worked. My job was to contact the National Guard commander on the ground and maintain communication with him for the Army staff. The very first night out, the Chief of Staff wanted to find out, okay, where were the marchers in what was the Army doing protecting them, and what was their deployment? And the general who represented us and with the chief of staff had no idea, nor did I. But I'm the guy sitting in the operations center. Find out. Got that? Get on the phone. I call this Army commander, National Guard. He's probably the brigadier general. And I told him who I was. I'm now a lieutenant colonel. Said, this is what we need to know. What is the location of your crew served weapons? What is the location of your other people? We need to report to the chief of staff. What the hell do you folks need that for? I said, General, I'm only calling the chief of staff in the Army want to find out. I'd be happy to tell him that you refuse to give it to me. No, I'll tell you. So he gave me the location of the crew served weapons. I report that back to my boss, the general. He went up and reported to the chief of staff. Now, we're talking still sensitivity about race, because that was what it was about. And my job was to make sure we knew where they were and how they got there. I then went back to my job as a guy in charge of race of guard and reservists on the Army staff. During the meantime, the Army Comptroller Colonel was a Air Force, colonel from West Point. He was the colonel who taught me, the officer who taught me how to shoot crap, as I think I mentioned to you.
Yes.
Going over. And he is now a colonel. And now I'm this time I was a colonel. And we got together quite often. And he laughed about it, taking my money. I said, I'm laughing about that too, because I'm now higher than you. I smile about that. I'm back in the Pentagon as a lieutenant colonel, working hard. I went from there to a graduate program that the Department of Defense has started for systems analysts. And that's when they had McNamara whiz kids. And they were creating problems for the Army. And the military set up a small group of qualified systems analysts. I was selected to go along with 5 Army officers to this class of some 31, 32 people, offered IDA, Institute for Defense Analysis. They ran the program. I was a senior officer, and so all that meant that I spoke for the Army, for the military, in this class when that was necessary. I'm smiling because in setting up this group, I got over to this as a student because I had been a math major at Prairie View, even though I did not do well in analytical geometry years ago. And economics is a function of math in many respects, and so I have my math background. I got selected to go to school, went off to school, full-time graduate school run by the University of Maryland, this program. Finished there, a year later, came back to the Army staff, was assigned to the office of Assistant Chief of Staff of the Army. A group set up to, as some people said, rewrite what the staff said, because our hires didn't like what we were giving them, so they rewrote it themselves. That meant that we were required, before it got to them, to make sure it fit the category that they needed. The
Right.
guy, my biggest problem was a particular general whose widow is here, and we see her every once in a while, and she's our best friend, but I said, you know what your husband did to me? But anyhow, another story. We worked at that staff, that group, until it's time to go to Fort Hood as a colonel, brigade commander, which is something a lot of folks look forward to doing. Let me back up from that. Before doing that, after leaving this graduate program, I got selected for a National War College, Senior Service College, the highest schools for any soldiers, Army, Navy, Marines, all have their own schools, except the National War College is all of them together. And I went off to that school and was the third Black American Army to go to National War College. The first to go there at that time was a Roscoe Robinson, who was the first to go from West Pointer to get the 4 stars. His wife is here. She is sad to say, suffering from dementia and does not recognize anyone. And while I was at the National War College, he going off to Hawaii, and he sent back and said, "Hey, can you send me a sweatsuit, because my wife put our sweatsuit in and bleach it and I can't recognize it." So I went off, bought one and sent it to him. But we're now at the National War College. Again, academically it's a great school. I enjoyed it, did well. I went from National War College.
Now, what's happening in Southeast Asia at this point? What year are we in?
We're now 61.
Oh, okay. All right. So.
I graduated in 61 from National War College.
Okay.
And so whatever happened then, we got folks over there. I'm not too sure. Back 61, I was not involved, and so I got doing other things.
Right.
But when I left the National War College, I went to Fort Hood as a brigade commander. I think I mentioned that, and we trained for very hard, and I enjoyed what I was doing. I had a good staff and good troops. I came over to the Chief of Staff's office. I left there as Lieutenant Colonel. Rather important period, because I went out to Campbell as a squadron commander in the 101st Airborne Division, which is there are 2 airborne divisions, 82nd and the 101st. And we happen to think that 101st is the best of them.
Of course.
And on top of that, I was a lieutenant colonel, armor, leaving the National War College, going off to command a squadron. And there was only 1 Cav squadron in the division, and only 2 Cav squadrons like that in the Army, one 82nd, the other 101st. And now it's time and we train very well, very hard. Now I was not airborne qualified. I got airborne qualified when I left the Armed Forces Staff, because I went to jump school and qualified as a paratrooper. Remember I said when I'm on a pole, I don't like heights? Why do you jump off an airplane? It's a challenge, that's why I did it.
So you were continually training even through all these.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that's what we're all about.
Yeah.
But I'm now airborne qualified, going to command a armor unit. I spent most of my time as infantry, except with the 2nd Armored Division. I was in armored infantry, but not in an armor unit as such. Never commanded a tank unit, never even fired a tank gun. But I go off to the 101st Airborne Division. We train hard. Vietnam. I am the only black commander in the division at that level. No other battalion commanders. We had 1 black colonel, and he commanded the trains, logistics. Went off to Vietnam, did very well. battalion squadron commander for the first part of my tour, and then the last part of my tour was deputy brigade commander. And I had a chance to meet some very important people. As a squadron commander during the war, I got visited by a fellow named Creighton Abrams, military assistant commander, MACV in Vietnam. I was the only armor unit in his area, in that area. And when he came out, he came to visit me. He'd land his chopper, get out, salute him, come over, sit on a Jeep. Okay, Julius, what have you done now? And I talked to him about what we're doing, how well we're doing, and so forth. Got a great relationship, which proved to be very important later on. Fought the war, got a couple of citations, medals, and stuff like that. Came back to the States. Assigned to the Army staff again. As a colonel, I get promoted to brigadier general and assigned to Fort Dix, New Jersey. Now, the interesting part about that, Fort Dix is not too far from Philadelphia. I'm now the deputy commander of Fort Dix. My job is to really be the guy in charge of training the post commanders in job to everything else. And we worked very hard. Drill sergeants worked for me. And I had a superb boss. Early on, he sent me to Washington to convince the Army not to close Fort Dix, doing a phase down. And the folks in the Army determined to close it. And our argument was, this is the major training center in the whole northeastern part of the United States, where parents send their youngsters to go in the Army, train there. Now you're going to close it? And I had beat up by a fellow named Rizzo from Philadelphia, mayor. You go down there and tell the folks they can't close it because we need it. All of my civilians who work at Fort Dix, what are you going to do if you close it? I'm a brigadier, I'm now a colonel, brigadier general rather, and I go to Washington and try to explain, and Becton, we hear what you're saying, now go back and go do your job. Yes, sir. Go back to Fort Dix, I tell my boss, Bert David, he tell everyone else that. So what did? They turn the politicians loose. And guess what? Fort Dix is still open today, is it not? When a politician get involved, sometimes good things happen. Training's no longer there, but Fort Dix is still open. Anyhow, at Fort Dix, I'm deputy commander. We worked very hard. My boss, Bert David, gets transferred to Washington to logistics. His replacement comes in. He's a guy who got promoted to brigadier general the same time I did. But in the meantime, he got promoted to 2 stars. Now he's my boss. I've been there about a year when he got there. So I know most of the people, everybody, and everybody know me, and he's incoming. So although he's the commander, and I'm still a deputy, when things happen, who do they come see? I'm the stuckee. Okay, fine, I understand that. Time moves on he's been there for about 6 months. And the 2-star list comes out, Major General, and I get promoted to Major General. Now, he doesn't fuss about that, but he just said, okay, I get rid of him now. Because the job I'm filling is that of a brigadier, not of a 2-star. I'm still there, and no one tell me where I'm going to go. I stayed at Fort Dix for about 6 months as a 2-star, and he's a 2-star. A little bit of discomfort on his part.
Right.
Because he wanted to be the sole guy in charge. I'm not trying to fuss him or cause a problem, but when people come in, I get to be the guy. His 2 sons got in a trouble one day. The provost marshal come see me. Go see me. Go see him. His son's not mine. No, but okay. I now get orders. I get promoted to 2 stars in August, and I'm still sitting at Fort Dix. And I went for about 3 months before I found out what I'm going to do. I found out I'm going to go to Fort Hood as a division commander. Now, why am I shocked by that? Because I'm going to command an armored division, and I'm also going to go when you got a lot of other 2-star who want that job, because this armored division is being converted from a triple capability division to a pure armored division. My armored experience is not very much. My boss at Fort Dix wanted a division, but he got a training center. Big difference between those two. 2-star billet, but I'm going to a division, and he is stuck there. And so, okay. I find out in the final analysis that Creighton Abrams, the fellow I said came out to visit and so forth, 4-star, had deceased. And he has written notes, Becton gets the armored division, 1st Cav. And it went into the record that way. And so now I'm heading off to Fort Hood to command a division. However, when I'm leaving Fort Dix, my boss wrote the worst report card I ever got, an OER. Becton is great at dealing with the civilians, great at dealing with community affairs, great at dealing with other things. He is horrible in training. No training discipline whatsoever. I've already left the training. I've been, okay, I'm down at Fort Hood, going to take command of division, and this report card goes up the chain. And when I get to Fort Hood, I've been in command of the division maybe 2 weeks. Oh, by the way, I'm there are only 2 black division commanders at that time. And we communicate with each other. Harry Brooks, who was out in Hawaii, 25th Division, and I got the 1st CAD Division. I had 3 superb battalion commanders, brigade commanders. My chief of staff of the division happens to be also a resident here today. I never knew the guy before, but he did a fine job, and I was happy with him. And he's now a 4-star, might add. How he got there is another story, but we have a great time around here. I get at Hood, we did a lot of hard training, spent a lot of time in the field, trying some new concepts, worked and worked and worked. And it's time now, been there for about 2 years. Race relations during that period, we're talking in the community is, took command in '76 of the division. And in '78, well, let me back up a little bit. Early '76, early 76, January. And it's, my wife's having a good time, the family's having a good time. The 4th child has been born, 5th child, the son, the one I mentioned. He is on active duty. Everything is right with the world. it's time for me to be transferred. And I lived next door to the Corps commander. He calls me up and said, oh, an interesting story. When I took command of division, I replaced the guy who became the Corps commander. But we knew each other as brigadiers. So he's a good guy. And as we prepare for my taking command of division, he said, okay, when you get here, George, we're going to have a change of command, mounted change of command, and we're going to troop the line, mount it, and then you take command. Bob, his name, hey, look, my experience riding a horse is not all that great, and I've been trained here at Fort Hood how to ride a horse because your wife taught me how to do that. She's a great horseman. But why don't you march on a horse and I stay on the stand, and then now I'm in charge and go to a armor division. Armor division don't ride horses. Okay, now we'll do it that way. And then before I get there, I get word who's going to be my boss. He could be my boss. He called me up again, Julius, guess what? I guess I should tell you I'm going to be the Corps commander, and on the subject of change of command, this is how we're going to do it. And you see a book and a picture of me on the back of a horse and we get to the ground, stuff like that. But we go through
You
this.
survived it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I moved from that division to a place in Springfield, outside in Bailey's Crossroads. OTIA, Army Operational Test and Evaluation Agency. Our job is to test all Army equipment and concepts in the hands of soldiers. What happens when soldiers put their hands on it? Mm-hmm. Does it still work? Mm-hmm. Of course, there's no one else looked like me in that job. Mm-hmm. I have close ties with my counterpart in the Air Force and the Marine Corps. Each of them have such a unit. My technician, a civilian, a real engineer, Walt Hollis. When I get there, he's been there forever. And when I walk in, he said, congratulations, General. Glad to have you here. Maybe we talk. Sure. Okay. I'll support you any way I can. One thing I expect, if I make a decision or make a recommendation and go before the Congress and you change that, don't expect me to not tell them what I think. Well, I understand that because I'm not going to make any decision that you don't agree with. He said, okay, fine. And that's the relationship we had. We tested the M1 tank, the new tank, not new, it was new then, Abrams tank at that unit. The program manager for that tank is also a resident here.
This is quite a collection of people.
He takes great delight in telling people how I had him do this, I had him do that. We got a good tank out, didn't we? Okay, another story. But I'm over at that unit, doing very well. It's now 77, going into 78. I get orders and a promotion to 3 stars. Then I get invited, I told to come over to the Chief of Staff. We had a long conversation, did not know what the job going to be, but I told you get promoted to 3-star, but there are a couple of billets I could go to. And I end up by getting the largest combat corps in the Army. Combat corps in the Army in Europe, 7th Corps. Our job was to take the lead if the Russians crossed the border. And hell, I'm just as happy as I could be, ready to go. From a racial standpoint, there are no other black Corps commanders. The announcement of my being that Corps commander was held up an extra several months while the Army told a USAR commander, who then told a German that a Lieutenant General Becton is coming in as commander of 7th Corps. And oh, by the way, he's a black American, to see how they took to it. Didn't bother them, and so that's what's done. I get over there, and I think you'll find amusing. While I'm getting ready to go to Germany, you're required to go to language school if you're going to go to language you don't speak. And while I'm in my language training in German was delayed because they didn't want to make the announcement, I'm going to be the Corps commander, the German Corps commander, until I could get the language in. And I couldn't do that until I went to school. And so while I'm in school, I am learning how to speak German. I spend my entire time, most of my time, preparing my remarks
Right.
for when I get there, because you have to go through that. And I had German in Muhlenberg. Matter of fact, I became the president of German American Club because I was doing so well in German. And as I was preparing my remarks, going from English to German to English to German, and by the time I got to Germany, I had that down pat. I had to change the command. I was on the platform, German press, German public, soldiers out in the field in front of me. And I went to that spiel about using Deutsch and English, going from English to Deutsch, back and forth for about 15 minutes. And when I finished, so proud of myself, got off the platform, parade's over, I'm descended upon by the press. Guess what they're speaking? They're not speaking English. They're speaking German. And I'm prepared for my remarks, prepared. And I flubbed it big time. And of course, I made it very clear. And they understood what I was faced with, what I had done. And I made it very clear. Whenever I went to talk to any group in the future, I never attempted to speak German. Because I could make it, I could say Guten Tag and Auf Wiedersehen and stuff like that, but no conversation.
Right.
But once I took command of the Corps, we had three great divisions. One commanded by a guy who was a very good friend of mine, we've been classmates together. He's one of the division commanders. He retired as a 4-star, I might add. The other was a very good friend, infantry. He was a 3rd Infantry Division. And I had a division back here in the 1st Infantry Division out in Colorado, but they would join us if war broke out. So I had 2 divisions, an armored cav unit, cavalry unit to do do the covering force and doing the thing what cavalry normally does. And as I joined this Corps, my deputy is a fellow named George Patton. George and I had a great relationship, an interesting relationship. Back when I was in Vietnam, George had a regiment and I had a squadron. But he had a different area. And when Abram come out and see me, it irritated George no end because I'm getting all the attention. Okay, George moves up, he gets promoted to Brigadier General, and he goes off to Fort Knox and becomes the Assistant Commandant. In the meantime, I become the branch chief while he's there. When I left the brigade and went back to Washington, I became Armored Branch Chief, in charge of the assignment of all armor officers. That shocked people too. I'd never been to Fort Knox as a school. I never had a great deal of experience dealing with assignments. I did have the support of the guy who sent me there from Fort Hood, and I had the support of the staff in the Pentagon, and I became branch chief, and it irritated George Patton no end, because he's sitting up there at Fort Knox in charge of all armor officers, school. I'm in charge of their assignments. And normally the branch chief gets invited to the branch school to talk to the students. Patton, hell no. Damn, not an armor graduate, never been to Knox, why should I invite him here? Okay, George, that's your business, sir. So I'm fine, I'm happy with that. I now go to Fort Hood as a division commander, and he comes in command of the 2nd Armor Division. We could get along well together. And I had done my job, he'd done his job. I go from there to the ICAP, to the OTIA training testing unit. George goes to Germany and becomes the deputy commander, 7th Corps. Time moves on. I come in as his new commander.
Yep.
George comes in. Boss, glad you're here. Support you in any way I can. You tell me to do something, I'll do it. George, the only thing I'm going to tell you, just do your job. You know what it is. You've been here. I have not been here before. You understand what's to be done. Got it. And we worked together quite well. He never said, sir, one time. Boss, always. Okay. This is now October, November, December. George comes in and said, boss, I like the way you're doing things, but I'd like to send my family home. Okay, fine. In the meantime, right before that, he said, I'd like to be transferred back to, no. Yeah, he said, I'd like to, I think I'll transfer back to the States, if that's okay with you. I called my boss at Heidelberg, United States Army Europe commander, the same fellow who was a company commander, student company commander when I was at Fort Benning, Blanchard, and the same guy who commanded 82nd Airborne Division when I was getting started with the 1st Cav. And he's now the 4-star in charge of Europe. Sir, George wants to go home. Good. Okay. I'll go back and tell Patton, the boss said okay. Fine. And then we have an exercise, Reforger, return of forces to Germany, which is an exercise proving that we can move forces from continental limits of the United States to Germany, fall under pre-positioning equipment, and fight the war. That's George's big in charge of back in the 7th Corps, the equipment. There's a Reforger exercise, and now we're going to have field operations. Reforger unit come in from Colorado. George is in charge of Corps Rear and some other administrative things, and the equipment that the incoming troops fall in on, and I'm out fighting the training battle. We get along superbly well. However, one minor thing. This is being done in February, this exercise. George's family is back in the States, and the weather turned like it is today. No frozen ground. This is unusual for us. This weather is unusual for us in Germany back in those days. And the weather turned warm. And I got hundreds of tanks out in the field tearing up German property. And we decided we got to stop this. So we're going to cancel. We're going to terminate. And I checked that with my boss. He agreed. And I said, okay, I will announce the fact we're going to terminate. And Blanchard said, nope, I'm the USAR commander. I will take care of that. And all of a sudden, a fellow named Al Haig flies in. You may remember I mentioned Haig was a graduate of my high school. Mm-hmm. He flies in and lands. Well, I guess I'll make the announcement then. It's not Becton, a Corps commander. It's not the 4-star USAR commander, but the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe is going to make this announcement. Okay. In the meantime, we're out talking while the troops are doing what they normally do, and the staff thinks that we're talking tactics. We weren't talking tactics. We're talking, Al Haig was telling me when he was in high school, he got kicked out of school because for smoking, and the principal told his mother, "You will never become anything." And so George Haig, Al Haig got promoted pretty good. And that's what we're talking about. And we stayed friends until he died. Okay. The weather turned warm, exercises canceled. We did a lot of damage to the German real estate, tore up big property damage, and we had our units back to their field, back to their locations, trying not to tear up the Germany streets because the streets are no longer frozen. You got tanks going over, and the tank would do severe damage to anything. We got back and recovered, and I liked the way George operated so well. George came in to see me. "Sir, I'd like to stay with you. I like the way you operate." You remember that word I said, sir? First time you ever used that word ever, when you had to stay on. "Sure, I'd like to stay here. Let me call Blanchard." I called Blanchard. "Sir, George want to stay here." "Hell no, he's going home." "Oh, okay." I go back and tell George. George, Houston commander said no. Okay. So he goes off and do his thing. In the meantime, I start getting in replacement for him. The very first one came in when George was leaving. He was off at the officers club at the club in Stuttgart and spent the night. His family's going home. And the next morning, my staff, other major commanders, and the band comes out to welcome him farewell. The one thing that George really resented more than anything else when he was division commander was the Guerillons, which is our 1st Cat Division song, cavalry song. Mm-hmm. And guess what song the band played? George walked on the step, "What?" And I almost died because they were out there. I couldn't do anything about it. And I never told the bandmaster, "Don't play that." I thought, well, never mind. I don't know what I thought. He got in his car and drove off. The driver drove off. Madder than hell. And it took me some time to recover that after he got back to the States, but tried to explain to him. I didn't arrange for that.
Did he thought that?
He thought I did it. Yeah. So I stayed on at Corps Commander. The Russians never attacked. We were prepared. We worked very hard. And when it came time to come home, I came home to Training and Doctrine Command, located at Fort Monroe, Virginia. I was the deputy commander, the only black American at that level. Jack Merritt, my chief of staff from the division, in the meantime, they're going from that position to 2-star at Fort Sill as the commander, from that position to the director of the Army, the Joint Staff, a 3-star billet. And from that position, he went to Europe to work to be a representative for the ambassador and the NATO forces, and became a 4-star. And so, while he is doing that, he's a 3-star now. So let me jump ahead. 3-star, and he's at Fort Leavenworth as the deputy commander for Training and Doctrine Command at Leavenworth, and I'm the deputy commander for training at Monroe. He's in charge of all officer training, and I'm in charge of all training centers. I point that out because the relationship that we have. He left there and then became a 4-star in Brussels. I'm back at the Monroe, 3-star billet. I not only become the deputy commander for training Doctrine Command, I become the Army inspector for training. a new position that the Chief of Staff of the Army wanted to try out. And now not only am I in charge of training, but I'm also in charge of unit in the field training. And which means I get a chance to mark up not only the training that we conduct for our soldiers, but also how well they're doing that. And I get a chance to inspect them, units. That also irritated a few folks because they never had one of these before until I got that job, until I was told to do that. Again, a racial standpoint, by that time there were 3 lieutenant generals. Roscoe Robinson going to 4-star. Art Gregg, who is now the J1 in the Joint Staff, and then the commander he went to the 3-star at the chief in the Army staff at the G4, 3-star billet. Okay, Roscoe gets promoted. Art and I stay in our 3-star billets. And I stayed at that job until I retire. Some interesting things took place during that time. I had a chance to represent the Army in some interesting positions that required dealing with the public. I might add, before that, I dealt with, I mentioned dealing with the National Guard. Now I'm dealing with what takes place in the field at the highest level, but only as a lieutenant general. I retired from the Army in August of 1983. And move into a civilian activity, but still as a retired lieutenant general. Looking for a job as a retired lieutenant general was not easy as I thought, because when I talk to corporations, I don't have any experience at the corporation level. I certainly don't have I got a master's, but so what? I've commanded many units on the ground, but industry at that time were not interested in soldiers, what they could do. I finally get a job, AID, Agency for International Development, and become the director of disaster assistance that the United States government have for helping other countries when they have major problems. I am now the guy in charge of that. Okay, I did that job from January of '84 to the summer of '85. And during that period, I had quite a few major disasters overseas. My biggest one was the famine in Africa, and we provided major support there, and I became the guy in charge of that support from all agencies providing support. Racial thing. The ambassador from South Africa came over to request assistance, and the agency director for AID, sure, go down and see General Becton. He'll take care of you. And I told my secretary, this is going to be amusing. Facetiously, I said that. The guy walks in to report to me, the director, to ask for assistance for the African support. He took one look at me, uh-oh, I forgot something, and he went out and left. And I called my boss at AID and said, I think we got a problem. I don't think he's going to see him back here. We didn't, because the last thing he expected to see was a black American in that position to provide support for him. because I would have provided the support, but he would have gotten an earful of what I think about what his country was doing from a racial standpoint. He may remember those days
Absolutely.
when apartheid was high. I stay in AID. We had a lot of interesting work going on. I did the job quite well. The agency, Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, the highest level in the government for providing support for the country. And I had made contact with some interesting people when I had that job in AID. One, the vice president, because of what we did for other countries. Two, a fellow named Gore, who was then senator from Tennessee, and a couple of representatives on the staff, on the congressional staff. And when it came time for me to go into FEMA with no political support, I had to get somebody to support me. And I had the vice president spoke on my behalf, Gore came over and spoke on my behalf, and several other people. I went through with no sweat at all. And I became the director of FEMA. Most interesting because I had a staff of political appointees. And the last thing they expect to see was a soldier coming in who had no political background as such. I said, guys, hey, I'm gonna do the job. I'm here to help you, you to help me. Anything you can do and you think that I'm not doing it right, tell me about it. I'll be the first to listen to you. And we got along very well. As a matter of fact, interesting enough, we just got Christmas cards from 3 of those political appointees this week. That's a long time ago. Anyhow, we go on to FEMA, and we now have all kinds of challenges. Floods. I was there less than a week when major flood took place in Northern Virginia, not too far from here. And I got Warner call, I want this kind of support. Well, my job was to advise the president whether the damage is sufficient that we should provide the support that they're asking for. And so I got Warner, came in a helicopter, using National Guard, Virginia National Guard chopper. We went up, took a look at the flood. It's pretty bad. I mean, it was really bad. Came back, landed. I made my report to the president, approving the recommendation from the state that they should have a declaration of disaster. And that went through. And of course, from that time on, anytime major disaster occurred, I would be the one who had to recommend to the president, yes or no. Sometimes we said no, sometimes we said no, yes, based upon what my staff told me, because they're the expert, they're out there on the ground. Now, FEMA did not go out and do the work themselves. FEMA is an organization that collaborate, coordinate, make contacts, but we have nobody who can go out and dig a ditch or do anything else. We just had to contact, and we also control those folks on the ground. And so, I spent from that time until '89 as the director of FEMA. Thoroughly enjoyed it, had good contact, made good relations. And then an interesting thing occurred. The governor of, while I was at FEMA, the governor of New Hampshire, a guy named Sununu, got very irritated the way that we were trying to support his installation of nuclear power plants. And we were responsible for not putting a plant in, but providing the security for that plant.
Right.
And so we exercised that. And my staff were not satisfied the way they were doing it, so we did not approve it. And he went ballistic.
He thought you were meddling with his plan, yeah.
He came down one day into my office and demanded that I change it. Governor, I hear what you're saying, but we're not going to do it until these things are done. I'm going to the White House. Be my guest, sir. He stormed onto the White House, and They said nothing to me because they knew what I was doing. And oh, by the way, while I was director of FEMA, I saw the president probably less than a half a dozen times. I didn't take the papers over to him in person. My contact with the White House presented my recommendation to the chief of staff there, and they talked about it and then up to the president. It wasn't me going in front of the president saying, this is it. Sununu went over and apparently did the same thing, but didn't get anywhere. Okay, now George Bush become president of the United States. Who did he select for his chief of staff? John Sununu, because his political influence, New Hampshire, and the importance of New Hampshire is to the Republicans, and Sununu now becomes the chief of staff to the president. And he had made it clear, if he ever got a chance to do something to me, he would do it, Sununu. It became very clear that his first action would be, I'm out of FEMA. Now, the president didn't step in and stop him. But George Bush did something very interesting. He called me and said, would you like to be ambassador? Sir, yes, sir. And I went home and told my wife, and she was not happy about that because she spent enough time being a potted plant, as she said, standing around the corner as a commander and everyone else is going on. Now I've become an ambassador. And I'm at home listening to this, and I get a call after I'm no longer director of FEMA. Bush did not stop him from Sununu from changing me from being the director of FEMA, but he did make it possible for me to become an ambassador because that would not bother Sununu. Get a call. Julius, the president-elect has had to change his mind. A friend of his in the Congress got defeated, Ed Derwinski, and he can no longer put you in the job of being working for the administration where they're going to put you. And that's when the subject came about who would take over FEMA. So Sununu said, you got to go. And I get the call that after Bush wanted me to go to become an ambassador, that this guy got selected. And he was a failure in the job that followed me in FEMA. And I could have predicted that. A lot of people could have predicted, but politics mean what they are. And so.
And the ambassador position got taken off the table.
I got taken off. No, my wife took me off that.
Oh.
Because when I got the call about becoming an ambassador to Hawaii, to Caribbean, we're not going down there. Hell no, we're not going. My wife doesn't swear often, but she said, we're not going to go down there. And I told the guy who was telling me this, okay, we understand. And that terminated my relationship with the White House. And
that was it, right?
And that was it. And that's when I became a civilian, happy with what I'm doing. I was been there not very long before I get this call about, would you be interested in helping us out, school system, District of Columbia. And I had assumed they want me to come down and talk about a board because they're trying to set up a board to take over and running things. And as you might remember, there's a time when the government was controlled by a control board. And the control board is the one that controls the school system. And they're the ones that were calling me. And I thought they wanted me to become part of a board to run the school. And as they're describing to me this situation, one of the members said, now when you get there, whoa, time out. What do you mean when I get there? Oh, we want you to become a superintendent. Didn't we tell you that? I thought you said run to be a part of the board. No, superintendent. Okay. I said, well, let me go home and see how it works out. As I'm driving home my car, I called my wife and said, guess what? I've been offered the job as superintendent. We had moved from Washington, home there, out to Springfield. We got great relations with the neighbors and everything else. And my wife said 2 conditions. Don't bring your anger home, and we're not moving. I said, okay, I can handle that. And when I got to the schools, I made very clear, no matter what they say, we're not moving from Virginia. I know what the rules are, but if you want me as the superintendent, I'm staying here. This is an emergency, you said, I'm staying here. The control board understood that. I stayed on in Northern Virginia, Springfield, and stayed on, got in the school system. Now, keep in mind, the only training I've had in school was university president, which is not all bad, but being a university president is a lot different than running a school. Also, I had a system in which we run out of money. We made enemy with the mayor, who was under control, a fellow named Marion Barry. You may have heard that name. He was the mayor, but he had lost control because the control board is in. And when you go before the Congress for school money, I got to go for the schools, not the mayor.
Right. So you come in at a real time of crisis.
Say again?
You came in at a time of crisis.
Yes,
Yes.
I
for
did.
the city.
Matter of fact, he had a few challenges too. He spent time in jail. He had a few other things too. But I got along with the mayor fine up until a point when he started getting into my business, and I said, well, Mr. Mayor, that's not your job. This is my job. I'm the mayor. Well, fine. I'm still the superintendent. You want to control that? Go to control board. I got through that and had some challenges in the school system. After being there for about 18 months, my family had a caucus. And they said, Dad, Julius, my wife, we're tired. We're tired of seeing the name Becton in the press. We're tired of seeing the beat up you're taking in the press. We're tired of this, we're tired of that. You're retired. Why don't you give it up? And being a practical man as I am, with understanding that I'm in trouble if I stay home. Okay. I report into the control board, into the media. I'm going to go home and become a private citizen. Why are you leaving? The press said, hey, you've seen what I've been faced with. You know what I've done and what I'm faced with. But I got problems at home, and I'm tired, and I'm going to go home and enjoy it. I think I have brought you up to date. I don't think I've covered that much time. That much.
Well, that was wonderful. Let me ask just one final question. This isn't so much a specific question as ask you to comment about, because I was struck in your incredible life story, the number of times that you were the first or one of very few. And if you could just sort of comment about a life led like that.
Well, I've been told that many times, and I thought about it too. I've had a lot of help. I'll be the first to admit. One is from fell upstairs, and I talked to them. I've already explained about the help I had with my ankle being shot up and missed the tendon in the bone and other things in combat, and some battles I've had in the political arena. But I try to be very practical what I'm doing. I have a very supportive family. They made moves that I think if I was a youngster being moved as much as they have, the different schools they go into, I've been very upset. They dealt with that. Financially, the jobs I had were not all that rewarding, money-wise. FEMA and working for the AID, I received no retired pay as a 3-star general. Why? something, and I went to FEMA, dual compensation. I could not draw the salary that a director would get and keep retired pay, because the federal government has a rule, you cannot be paid by the federal government for 2 jobs. One retired, one there. That's been changed, by the way, since then. So we were not making a lot of money. And when I finally left FEMA, I was able to get a couple boards. During that period, I've gotten, I ended up by joining 4 corporate boards. First one was Illinois Tools Work down in headquarters in Illinois. And a fellow named Jack Vesey, former director, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, former division commander, and a good friend, called me and said, Julius, how would you like to be on a board? Come on, Jack, I got enough boards now. This one pays money. Oh, now that's different. That one, the second board, Wackenhut. You may have heard about them, security.
Sure.
A fellow named P.H. Kelly, Marine Corps Commandant, called me and said, hey, we need you down here. There's a position down here. They never had a black on the board before. We want you to come down to be on the board. They pay money? Sure. Okay. I joined Wackenhut. Next one, I'm on a Marine Spill Response Corporation. They're the agency that being formed to deal with floods when a ship has problem with spills. The big spill took place down the Gulf.
Right.
MS Military Spill Response Corporation. My contact was there when I was at TRADOC as the deputy commander. The Coast Guard on the coast commander was a retired vice admiral, and he was now the president of this new organization, Marine Spill Response Corporation. And sure, I'll come out there, Jack. You pay money, I'll be there. And the last one was something called GD, General Dynamics. And I got a call one day from a fellow named Jack Merritt, name ring a bell again, and another civilian whose name I cannot think of right now. They were on GD boards, and they were looking for, they never had a minority, and had a vacancy. How's to join us? Jack, if you say so, and to pay real money, I'd be happy to. I joined that board. GD, Wackenhut, Marine Spill Response Corporation, and I already called for what
you got it, but yeah.
General Dynamics, Wackenhut, Marine Spill Response Corporation. It'll come to my mind pretty soon. But we were sitting in tall cotton, financially speaking. I was able very quickly to pay off my house. I was at the position I go out and buy 2 cars, one for myself, one for my wife, paying in cash. And what else can you, I'm tall, my kids are in school, enjoying what they're doing. We're just having a great time. And you think back in all those positions, I was the first Black American at the corporation, each of the corporations. First Black American, be a Corps commander. First Black to become the Army Inspector of Training. I was not the first Black general for the division commander, but the second or third, but in that group. And it's something that we were aware of. I mean, we, because the family's involved. Well, I don't lord it over everyone's head, because I know I was lucky, I was fortunate to be at a position at the right time. But so what? I think that when I had those jobs, I demonstrated that a Black American could get the job done. To me, that was the most important thing. And we worked very hard when we knew that we were under a microscope. People looking at what we're doing. Every time we step out of line, we knew it. And somebody told us about it. We knew, don't try to do it again.
That's a lot to carry.
What choice did I have? Go home and sit and drink myself stupor and not enjoy what I was doing. I enjoyed what I was doing. And I was good at what I did. And I had good friends. And one of the interesting things, we're working on my 90th birthday party in June, and I've been told, you just pay for it, but be there, and we'll take care of everything else. And so right now they're working on who they're going to invite, and many of the people being invited are the same ones I work with, whether it's in the Army, whether it's in the corporation, or whomever, even a couple of folks from here, because we developed a relationship with these folks. It's important to me. People to people is something which I think I do well. We're sitting in this room right now because the deputy administrator, when I saw him this morning, I need a plate. You got this. Hey, I was told, George, no, you got it. You stay here as long as you want.
Okay.
When the Fairfax wanted to get a radio announcement made, I got to be the stuckee. Would I do that? You may have heard over radio about advertising about the Fairfax. And I went down to the radio station, NBC, with the woman who's in charge of that and housing. And matter of fact, I did it, and I had heard the tape, but I never heard the broadcast. And one of my friends called me one day, hey, I just heard you on radio. You did? What did it sound like? And I got calls from all over the country, people who heard it.
That's great.
Until finally my wife heard it on radio, not just from the tape. So it's that kind of relationship that we have. The Army magazine, you probably have never seen it, but it's a monthly publication put up by the Association of the United States Army, in which a fellow named Jack Merritt was the first publisher. The second publisher was a fellow named, first president. The second was a fellow named Gordon Sullivan. These names ring a bell. And these are people that I've worked with all my life, that we have a very good relationship. And I was asked, there was an article published, which I still have never seen a published writer yet, but talk about my efforts back on the Poussin perimeter and the breakout going to 201, and how what we did made to push through for the division to get on to where we ended up by doing. And I didn't do a lot except lead my unit. They thought that I led the charge. So they published that, and the first time I heard about it was when friends down in Texas, hey, congratulations. What the hell are you talking about? You haven't seen Army magazine? No, I haven't. You ought to take a look, page 19. There's my picture and a story of what they said I thought I'd done. Those are the kinds of things which make me feel pretty good about what I've done. So when I finally go to the great beyond, I think I've done everything I could do to help myself, my family, and then not just race, but also the country. Does that answer your question?
That is a perfect place. Yes, it answers my question, and it's a perfect, I think, note to end on. So
Hey.
that just leaves me to thank you very much
Well,
for your service and for your time with us today.
I've had fun doing what I'm doing, because when I get to the point I cannot have fun, I stop doing it. And if you read in that book I have, I got philosophy of command. There's some 13 points. Maintain your sense of humor. If I can't do that, I'm in the wrong job.
That's the most important. Yeah, yeah.
Okay?
Wow.
I enjoy it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.